Okay, okay. If you can turn on your video so that I can also see you. I think you'll recall I had the honor of moderating a session a couple of years ago in Muzaffarabad where you were speaking.
Oh, yes, yes,
Yes, where President Masood Khan was the chief guest. You'll recall.
Now,
And your intellectual input was very meaningful at that time as well.
thank you very much for the appreciation. Thank you very much. Can you see me now?
We'll be formally starting in about 2 minutes, but let me just introduce you with the other panelists who have joined us so far. We have Dr. Long Xingchun from China. We'll be shortly joined by Mr. Leonid Sevin from Russia, and also Dr. Kandil Abbas from Islamabad. And but you will be the first speaker, because first of all we want to hear from you how, as a Afghan scholar and expert, you see the situation after the political changes in Afghanistan, and how Afghanistan can be governed in a better manner, and what are your expectations from the neighboring and regional countries. So I think that will set the tone for the webinar today. Then we can take it from there based on what are your expectations and concerns. So we'll be formally starting in just about 1 minute, and I'm just waiting for a couple of more panelists to join. Allow me the honor of introducing the acting president of Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain. He'll be the chair of this session, and we'll have a speech from Pakistan's National Security Advisor, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, as well, regarding the future of Afghanistan. So I think we have a timely and substantive event that I'm really honored to host with such an illustrious panel.
Dr. Long.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Neha.
How are you?
Fine, thank you. How about you? How is the weather in Chengdu?
Yes.
How is the weather in Chengdu?
Weather is good. I'm in Ankara.
Okay, okay. So I was talking to Dr. Long.
Yeah, yes, sir.
How are you?
Yeah, good.
Neha.
Yeah.
So you're in Chengdu at this time?
Pardon?
Are you in Chengdu at this time?
Yeah, yes.
So how is the weather like today?
Yeah, very nice recently, because now it's middle winter, middle autumn. The weather is very nice.
Okay.
Very comfortable.
Very comfortable. Good. Chengdu is a very nice place. I've been there many times.
Visit Chengdu next time?
Yes, maybe. I've been there many times. Maybe 24 times.
Gentlemen, I think let me allow the honor to start these proceedings formally. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. On behalf of the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, Islamabad, it is my great honor and a privilege to host this very important webinar at a critical time in the history of this region. The topic of today's webinar, ladies and gentlemen, is the future of Afghanistan and regional stability, challenges, opportunities, and way forward. And you'll agree that perhaps we are hosting this event at a time which is very critical in terms of the changing environment, not just in Afghanistan, but also its possible implications and consequences for the neighboring countries in particular, and the region and international community in general. So with that view, we are hosting this webinar. CAS is privileged to take this initiative in close collaboration with the National Security Division, and we'll have a special address by the National Security Advisor of Pakistan, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, as well as part of today's webinar. The sequence of the presentations will be as follows, that we'll have 4 perspectives, respectively from Afghanistan, from Russia, from China, and a leading expert on Iran, followed by a question and answer session. And then we'll have the honor of listening to the National Security Advisor of Pakistan, Dr. Moeed Yusuf, and his keynote address, which will be followed by the concluding address by the chair of today's webinar, the acting president of the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan, who's also former Vice Chief of the Air Staff of the Pakistan Air Force. Each panelist will have about 15 minutes to share his thoughts. It is my humble submission that South Asia, West Asia, and Central Asia, these 3 regions are critically affected by whatever has happened in the last 42 years in Afghanistan. And although you will perhaps agree that whatever has happened in Afghanistan has disproportionately affected Pakistan in terms of security, economy, and stability. But you will also perhaps agree that the Pakistani nation has accommodated, helped, and borne the burdens and the tears, and also helped our Afghani brothers throughout thick and thin in the last eventful history of Afghanistan. And despite the fact that Pakistan disproportionately was on the receiving end of allegations and blame game for the instability and other issues faced by external powers who were intervening in Afghanistan at different times in history. So with this view, I think we have a very eventful history related to Afghanistan and its implications for the entire region, but particularly Pakistan. And that is why we are holding this webinar with the hope that we learn from our very eventful history and try to find ideas and possible solutions so that our future, our common future, can be more peaceful, more progressive, and more profitable for the common good of not just the Afghan nation, which has suffered so much in the last 42 years, but also all its neighboring and regional countries, for the common cause of peace, progress, and prosperity. And so I look forward to a very constructive and result-oriented suggestions and ideas from this illustrious panel in order to how we can mutually contribute towards stability of Afghanistan, towards the addressing the humanitarian crisis that it is facing, and in future helping develop a peaceful, progressive region which allows it to benefit from the several regional connectivity projects for the common cause of developing this region. So with these few words, first allow me the honor of introducing the first speaker of today's webinar, Professor Dr. Fazlul Hadi Wazeen of Salam University, Kabul, Afghanistan. Dr. Wazeen is a professor at the Salam University, Kabul, Afghanistan, and an internationally respected scholar on regional and global issues. He was also a candidate for first vice president's office in the last presidential elections. He's also a member of the International Union of Muslim Scholars. He's fluent and expert in Persian, Arabic, English, Urdu, Pashto, and Turkish languages. I also have had the honor of being part of several dialogues and engagements earlier, in which I had the pleasure of listening to his insightful and very constructive ideas. So without any further ado, I request Professor Dr. Fazlul Hadi Wazeen to basically share his thoughts regarding how, as a leading Afghan expert, we can understand that how Afghanistan can be better governed and in future, and what are the challenges and opportunities that he can identify, and what does he expect from the neighboring and regional countries. Dr. Fazlul Hadi Wazeen, the floor is yours.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. I will start with salam, which is the slogan of peace, the symbol of peace and stability and brotherhood. Mr. Air Marshal Farhat Hussain, Saab, the chair of this prestigious webinar, respected brother Sayyid Muhammad Ali, Saab, respected guests, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. In the beginning, I would like to thank you for inviting me in this prestigious seminar, and it's actually an honor for me to be part of this, a humble part of this webinar, which is very, I think it's very, this was a very timely initiative by your center to hold this webinar, and also to invite scholars from different countries. And I think that this webinar, the outcome of this webinar was very beneficial and important, not for Afghanistan and Pakistan and other regional countries and other countries. We know that what happened in Afghanistan, the new changes, and that Taliban took over the whole Afghanistan, and the 15 August they entered the Kabul. Now they have announced their government and they are on power in Afghanistan. It is a big change, not for Afghanistan as well. It's a big change for the region as well, and bringing changes in even its effect. It will affect the world politics as well. So it is very important to think about, to ponder and think about this important changes in Afghanistan, and also to study the different dimensions of this big changes, and also to understand the effects which may have this what happened in Afghanistan. This is very important. I think that you are the successful. That you have your center is the pioneer to hold this kind of seminar, and I hope that the outcome and the papers of this seminar and the saying of scholars should be translated also to a Persian and Pashto, and should be presented to the new Afghan government and the stakeholders in Afghanistan as well, for a better understanding of the situation. We know that Afghanistan is going through instability and war and occupation since 43 or 44 years. Afghanistan is the instability in Afghanistan has started from 1973, when Mr. Mohammed Daud Khan took over, and he was a military coup. They took over the power, and they ended the monarchy system in Afghanistan. As we know all, that the happening of a military coup by some military army officers, it means this is a sign of instability, because in the stable countries, the military coup will never happen. Whenever one of the signs of instability in any society, in any country, is the happening of military coup. Because in stable countries, you cannot witness military coup. The military, the army is doing the job. They are guarding the boundaries of the country, the borders, and they are looking after their job. And whenever there is a military coup in a country, it means the system does not work, the civil system does not work, there is problems. So it was the beginning of instability in Afghanistan actually starts from 1973. Then after 5 years, the Democratic Party of Afghanistan, which had the communist ideology, Marxist ideology, they took power in 1978 in April. And then they, from there, it was another juncture or turning point for Afghanistan. Afghanistan was pushed to more instability. Then the Soviet occupation came in 1979. They invaded Afghanistan, and there was a struggle, a jihad against the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, the Mujahideen era, and finally, after almost 10 years, that occupation come to the end. But it had destroyed the country. And the Soviet occupation was very, very dangerous and had a lot of effects in the Afghanistan society. Afghanistan was totally destroyed. Then the fall of communist regime of Dr. Najibullah in 1991 and 92. Then after that, the Mujahideen, they took power. Unfortunately, there was the internal war between the Mujahideen, which also had very negative effects, negative effects on different aspects of life of Afghan nation. And then the Taliban movement was established, and in 1996 they took power, and they established Emirat Islami Afghanistan, and they was ruling the country for 5 years. Their regime was only recognized by 3-4 countries like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates. And after what happened in the 9/11 in USA in New York, then Afghanistan was invaded and occupied by not only by United States forces, but only by the NATO pact. And they, for 20 Americans, they fought their longest war in their history outside of the United States in Afghanistan. And of course, this was the different. They used different kind of weapons, even prohibited weapons. They used the method of the bombs in Afghanistan. For 20 years, they spent billions and billions of dollars in Afghanistan. When they came to Afghanistan, they invaded Afghanistan. They occupied Afghanistan, and there was promises that they will bring peace, stability, prosperity, good governance to the Afghan nation. They will support human rights, democracy. But after 20 years of their fighting and staying in Afghanistan, what we said in the end, they left Afghanistan. They were, of course, the Afghan nation and the Taliban movement was in the front. And they had a long struggle against the presence against the occupation. Finally, after 20 years, they left Afghanistan, or they forced to leave Afghanistan. And according to some American analysts and military officers and politicians, America was defeated. United States was defeated in Afghanistan. They said they used the term defeated. To the American in Afghanistan. And also some go beyond that further. They say that the West is defeated in Afghanistan. And so this was one of the officials of the European Union. I think he was saying that actually the West is defeated in Afghanistan. The values are defeated in Afghanistan. Anyhow, Taliban dramatically, then there was the Doha Accord. The United States was forced to sit with the Taliban, which was they calling terrorists, and they, after a long negotiations in Doha, in Qatar, finally there was the Doha Accord, the Doha Agreement, and finally, based on that agreement, the Americans promised to leave Afghanistan, and finally they left Afghanistan in 21st August of the last August. And after that, dramatically, the Taliban movement was just coming forward to Kabul, and just they finally on 13th, 15th August they took over, and they came to Kabul, and now almost it's 4 weeks, something at least almost 4 weeks. Now they are 1 month they are in Kabul, and before 3-4 days they announced their new interim government in Afghanistan in their cabinet. And this was the very short and concise history, the main points of this, the whole story in Afghanistan, which I mentioned here. Is okay. I don't have time to go into the details. The respected scholars, they are aware of all these details. Now, Afghanistan is facing a new era. A new chapter is again opened in the history of contemporary Afghanistan history. Now Taliban are again, after 20 years, now they are again in Kabul and they are again in power. And this what happened in Afghanistan this time, compared to the previous Taliban rule, there are many differences. Now, not only this Taliban who are ruling Afghanistan in Kabul, they are not the same version of the first Taliban before they was ruling before 25 to 20 years. And also the situation in Afghanistan and around Afghanistan, in the neighboring countries, in the world, it is also not the same situations. Many things are changing. So now we are not only Afghanistan, but the neighboring countries, the whole region, the international community are facing new opportunities and also new challenges. There are some opportunities and the outcome of what happened in Afghanistan, and also this negative, because what happened in Afghanistan, I think it's it's not only a local, a national issue in Afghanistan, because the whole world was part of what was happening in Afghanistan. The whole world was a part of just 20 years. The whole world was engaged in Afghanistan. So what happened, positive or negative, the outcome and the result is also not. It's not a national issue. It's not limited to Afghanistan. It's not limited to the Afghan nation, but it's going beyond, going to the neighboring countries, the whole region, as well as the international community. So now, as you see to the media, I think from 1 month or more than 1 month, Afghanistan is the headline of all channels, all newspapers, even from the Brazil and Argentina, the African countries, to the Asia, to the Europe, to the United States. Whenever you're opening any TV channel, either there is some news about Afghanistan, or there is a discussion about Afghanistan, there are some shows about Afghanistan, which means this is an indication that how Afghanistan has become important, how this issue has important. Now, therefore, I will have to mention this, that I think this is something is emerging internationally. So in a new era, I think there's maybe new blogs, new changes. Even this will be the topic for many studies and the research centers, and this will for a long time. What happened in Afghanistan. So I think if we see what happened in Afghanistan from this dimension, that is not a local issue, not as a regional issue. It is just affecting the whole world. So it should be studied from different aspects: the outcome, the effects, the possibilities, the opportunities, the challenges. So it should be studied. I think this webinar is. I think it should be. I humbly suggest to your respected center that it should be the start, but not the end. And a series of seminars, webinars, I think, is needed from your centers and other centers to just follow the changes in Afghanistan. So after this introduction, I'm coming to my main points. Just I tried, because if I say something about the challenges and opportunities without an introduction, interest to the topic, I think it does not work. So therefore, it was necessary just put this this point to people. Now, yes, in Afghanistan, we in Afghanistan, not only the Taliban movement, but in Afghanistan now we have opportunities. The door of opportunities is open for us, for the Afghan nation, for Afghanistan, as well for the region and potential. Now also there are challenges. And this is the question that now, how we can utilize, benefit from these opportunities, how it's possible or not, how we can do that. This is a big question. And also how we can, is it possible to change the challenges to opportunities? It's another issue. Just from one side we have opportunities. So are we able to utilize, to use, to benefit from these opportunities for Afghanistan, for the region, for the international community, from these opportunities in different aspects, or how we can convert the challenges to opportunities, and also how we can face the challenges. This is also the question: how to, if it's not possible to convert it to opportunities, at least how it is a question that can we face, how we can face the challenges that should not be harming for anyone in Afghanistan or for outside Afghanistan. Anyhow, so I think the first opportunity for Afghanistan is that the war is ended now in Afghanistan. Now there is we are not the Afghan nation. We are not. We used to open our eyes and every morning that wake up with the sounds of bullets and explosions and suicide attacks and bombings and different kinds. But now, Alhamdulillah, that there is no the sound of violence, and that is now it is silenced. So this is the end of the war in Afghanistan, a big opportunity, because if what is going on in any country, there is no any opportunity or ground for development, because the stability and the security is the base. One of, I'm not saying that this one of the most important basis for any kind of development, for sustainability, for peace, for harmony, for everything. So this is a big opportunity. That now there is no war in Afghanistan. And I think this is the credit goes to the Taliban movement, that they have discredited that finally they have took over on the whole of Afghanistan territory, and now they are. This is an opportunity. But the question is Taliban movement, the Taliban leadership, and they are in the front, and our other political leaders, parties, civil society, Afghan nation as a whole, are we able to use the end of the war just to strengthen the security in Afghanistan? So this is the end of the war is a big opportunity for Afghanistan, and also it's an opportunity for the region, for the neighboring countries. What happens in Afghanistan, it has effects on Pakistan, on Iran, on Central Asia, on Russia, even India, and the whole region, and also the Middle East and other countries. So this is how Afghan nation, how neighboring countries, how the whole region countries, the whole world, European Union, United States, how they can benefit from this opportunity in Afghanistan for the security, for the stability, for the economical prosperity as a whole. How we can do that? Because also keeping in mind the very, very important, and from other sides critical, geopolitical situation in Afghanistan. That Afghanistan is this is very important. The second challenge is that after the end of the war, it is just how to bring the security. Security now, it is not, it doesn't have the conventional or traditional definition. Now security is, as we know, it's a different kind, and the meaning of the terminology has now, the definition is changed of the security. So how we can bring security, not only physical security, but we have also political security, before all the food security, and also the economical security, job security, whatever of this kind of securities in Afghanistan. So this is the second challenge. How is ending of what is one thing, keeping and just bringing security in its wide meaning is another issue. So it is an opportunity. If the Afghanistan government, the new rulers of Afghanistan, they can bring security for Afghanistan, and the world, the region, the neighboring countries, the world is supporting Afghan nation for this security. This will be very beneficial. This will be an opportunity. But if the security is in risk, and there is potentials and possibilities for unrest in Afghanistan, and this risk for security, this will be a big challenge. And in Afghanistan going again to instability, then it will affect Pakistan and Iran, and Central Asia, China, India, Russia, Middle East, and Europe, and all other countries. For example, if there is insecurity in Afghanistan, instability, and not peace in Afghanistan, very simple example of this is that the refugees will, yes, there will be a very big wave of refugees to the neighboring countries, to the Iran, to the Turkey, to the European Union, and this will be a big issue. There will be the problem of narcotics in Afghanistan, drugs, and again, if there is no security, no government, then this will bring Afghanistan will be again a good place for the cultivation and of export of narcotics, refugees. And also Afghanistan could be a good haven for those armed organizations. Just may harm the neighboring countries, the region, and that will be a big challenge. So bringing security is a challenge, and if the security is just strengthened in Afghanistan, there is a real security in Afghanistan, this will be a big opportunity, and will make the base for many other opportunities which will come. The other thing after security is the reconciliation, and my point of view. Ladies and gentlemen, the Taliban is an armed force. They are a movement, struggle movement, jihadi movement, whatever you say, resistance movement. They came to power again by power after 20 years of war in Afghanistan. But Afghanistan needs, after a long 4 decades of war, and the outcome and the results of the war, and the socially, politically, economically, culturally, and whatever. So there is a urgent need for reconciliation. Reconciliation, a real reconciliation. Because you can rule, you can enter power, okay, you can take over the power, okay, it's okay. But it's not be sustainable. To keep this power, to strengthen this power, and just to rule. And this is not welcome by the gun, not by the tanks, not by using the force. Now it is an opportunity, and also it is a big challenge, Said Saab, because this is I think you will say to me that I should stop. Huh?
Yeah, so, Dr. Wasim, can you conclude?
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So this is they were asking. No, we need a real reconciliation. Taking over Panjshir doesn't mean that Taliban has taken the heart of Afghanistan. They have to conquer the cities, the valleys, the provinces easier than to conquer the hearts. Taliban, they are in need of have to take initiative for the real reconciliation. And also this is because if there is no real national reconciliation, the potential of unrest and again starting the war is high. Yeah, because considering the situation of Afghanistan, if someone in Afghanistan has 50 armed men, and also have for the ammunition and needs for 6 months. This 50 armed men, they can destabilize the whole country, and this is possible in Afghanistan. So taking over Panjshir in Kabul and Afghanistan, Herat, and all in north and west, south, it doesn't mean that it is just the war is ended in Afghanistan. No, now the potential are there, and also therefore it is very important that the national reconciliation should be done. The fourth thing is that the partnership in the government. Taliban was just said that they will announce an inclusive government, but unfortunately, after 3 weeks of no government in Afghanistan, they announced a government that is totally restricted to the Taliban leadership. Okay, the question is that if you are intended to have this kind of government, the government is only restricted to the Taliban. So why you have for delay for 3 weeks? The whole ministry, the whole government is not functioning in Afghanistan. The people are waiting, and after this long, just now you have announced this government, which is not. This is not just, because if you are not going to providing justice, not partnership, national partnership, I think this is not. It's not possible to have a long-term government in Afghanistan. And this is, I think, the Taliban has did a big mistake by announcing this government, which is totally restricted to the Taliban and as well to the Kandahar and the Paktia, and also the one ethnicity in Afghanistan. They all other ethnicities are just discluded from the government, and also this all but other restricted all but this religious scholars like Maulavis, and also this is no woman in the government, and so no any single person from the outside of Taliban. But if Taliban is not recorrecting this big historical mistake which they have done, I think they will lead the stone for another unrest and possible insecurity in Afghanistan. And also that finally I'm mentioning that 2 points and just not going into detail. And also there is the Taliban should be given an opportunity to rule, and just we see how they're doing. Because the Afghan nation, the political parties, they should have a constructive and positive approach to Taliban. They should give, in Afghanistan, and also the Taliban should be given a chance to rule. It should not be criticized because 25 years Taliban have did some mistakes. Now the international community should not push the Taliban to the corner. If the international community repeating the same mistake of pushing Taliban to the corner, then the outcomes and results will be very dangerous, not for Afghanistan, also for United States. Have just frozen about $10 million of Afghan assets in the United States. This is not just. Taliban as part of the Afghan nation. The whole Afghan nation should not be punished by this kind of policies. Also, the fifth and the last thing is that the Taliban should keep their promises. If Taliban is just not keeping their promises to the Afghan nation, I think this will be very dangerous and they will lose their credibility. By these words, once again, I'm thanking you. And there's a lot of points to say, but there's no time. With this, I'm ending. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Professor Dr. Hadi Wazin. A very comprehensive account of the history of Afghanistan, what it has endured, and also thank you for identifying the opportunities that Afghanistan at this critical moment in history offers to the neighboring countries, to the region, and to the world. And thank you also for warning that if this moment and opportunity is not seized timely by the neighboring regional and international countries, then the consequences will be borne by the neighboring countries, the region, and also beyond. So thank you for highlighting that. And now that brings me to the next speaker. Dr. Long Shinchun is the president of Chengdu Institute of World Affairs. He is has been illustrious professor of School of International Relations. He is also adjunct senior fellow at the Charhar Institute in Beijing and an adjunct senior fellow of the Academy of Regional and Global Governance under Beijing Foreign Studies University. He received his master's in international relations from the Institute of South Asia Studies at Sichuan University and obtained his PhD in international studies from Beijing Foreign Studies University. He is also a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins University, Washington, D.C., Department of International Relations, the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka, and a senior visiting fellow at Singapore as well. So I think Professor Fazul Hadi Wazin has set the stage to expect us to know that what could be the role of the major powers in rebuilding Afghanistan. I think you'll agree that Dr. Fazul Hadi Wazin has identified some opportunities and some challenges, and it will be very appropriate to hear a leading Chinese expert deliberate upon that how well the international community in general and China in particular can contribute towards rebuilding Afghanistan. So, Dr. Shinchung, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and all panelists. It's my pleasure to be here and to share my personal view with our friends from neighboring countries of Afghanistan. And first of all, let me make a very brief introduction about my institute, Chengdu Institute of World Affairs. It was established last May. We mainly focus on the studies of South Asia and Southeast Asia region. So Afghanistan and also Pakistan are we pay more attention recently to follow the change of the situation. Hope that in the future we can maybe co-sponsor this kind of seminar and to discuss about the regional issue like the stability of Afghanistan or rebuilding. I hope that in the future maybe we can sponsor this kind of seminar and invite all participants to attend, or maybe after the pandemic we can invite all of the panelists to Chengdu. We can talk face to face. For this topic, first of all, let me congratulate for all Afghanistan people because for the withdrawal of foreign troops and Afghanistan back to the hand of Afghanistan people. The new page we have a new page. Afghanistan and the people we may start the rebuilding of the country. And for my personal view, peace and stability is the precondition of rebuilding. And we know that Taliban promised that Afghanistan territory should not be allowed to pose threat to any other country. Terrorist organizations should not be allowed to maintain foothold on Afghanistan territory. As this promise is very, very good. It's not only beneficial to other countries, but it's benefit to Afghanistan for Afghanistan peace and stability. But we know it's very complicated matters. It's very difficult for Afghanistan, for Taliban to realize this kind of promise and purposes because there are some differences among Taliban, and also Taliban have very complicated and long-term connections with such kind of terrorist groups. I think it's need a long time for Afghanistan, for Taliban to eliminate all kinds of terrorist groups out of Afghanistan territory. And also maybe some terrorist groups, maybe they have some actions to counter the action by Taliban and the international community. I think it's a tough task for Taliban and the international community to realize, and Taliban and Afghanistan, I think, cannot realize these purposes alone. They need help and the coordination from neighboring countries and the international community. For example, if some countries, especially some major powers, for their own evil or selfish purposes, they like to support some terrorist group to harm other countries. For example, the US, they want to utilize East Turkestan Islamic movement as a tool to destabilize Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So we should contain and stop such intention and actions. And secondly, in my personal opinion, our neighbor countries of Afghanistan should play a leading role for the stability and reconstruction of Afghanistan. Because if the Afghanistan get involved in instability or civil conflict, firstly, it will harm our neighboring countries. So if Afghanistan realizes stability, all our neighboring countries may benefit from that. If other countries outside the region powers, they want to intervene the internal affairs of Afghanistan. So if there's no neighbor countries involved or support, the foreign countries like the US or European countries or other powers, they cannot intervene the internal affairs of Afghanistan. So now we had a very good news that at the initiative of the government of Pakistan, the foreign minister of Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, Iran, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan hold a foreign minister meeting on the Afghan issue among neighboring countries of Afghanistan. And on September 8th, neighboring countries decided to set a main Taliban regular consultation of special envoys for Afghanistan affairs, as well as regular meetings, representatives of embassies in Kabul to discuss and coordinate the joint efforts. It's a very, very good news. So if our neighboring countries get consensus, so there is no any chance for other countries to separate the countries or separate Afghanistan and rule. There's no chance for outsiders to harm the stability of Afghanistan. And thirdly, in my personal view, Pakistan is the most important country, most important neighboring countries for Afghanistan. Pakistan should play a dominant role or leading role in the reconstruction of Afghanistan, because geographically foreign the aid from international community only the international community, international assistance, or the international trade of Afghanistan. So Pakistan is the most important channel to Afghanistan. If Pakistan, if the situation in Pakistan still stay in instability, as we know, in Pakistan, there are some frequently terrorist attacks, like in Kyrgyz and northwest region closer to Afghanistan. So I think it's very important. Our neighboring countries, not only for Afghanistan, but also for Pakistan stability. As we know, Pakistan Taliban and Afghanistan Taliban are different groups, are different organizations, but there are some very frequent complex connections between the two Talibans. For the stability of Afghanistan, so all our relevant countries, especially neighboring countries, we should help Pakistan to counter terrorism and to eliminate all kinds of terrorist group and separatist group from Pakistan. So if Pakistan realizes stability, I think it must be very helpful for the rebuilding of Afghanistan. My opinion for the role of major powers in the reconstruction of Afghanistan, I think for the major powers, especially the 5 permanent members of UN Security Council, US, China, Russia, France, UK, all major powers, first of all, they should not intervene in the internal affairs of Afghanistan, respect the sovereignty and the territory integration of Afghanistan. They should respect Afghan people to decide their future, to realize Afghan need, Afghan owned for their own country, to decide the development, the values, the systems, how they govern the country. From the experience over the past 20 years, foreign intervene make more trouble to Afghanistan more than the problems they resolved. So maybe I think the UN Security Council maybe can pass a resolution containing any double standards on terrorism and also contain foreign intervention to the internal affairs of Afghanistan. And secondly, international community, especially major powers, is the obligation for major powers, especially the US, like European countries, and also other countries, major economies should provide emergency humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. As the report that there are 14 million people of Afghanistan are facing food shortage supply. So international humanitarian assistance is needed for Afghanistan people. Yeah, I think it's a very important factor for the stability and peace in Afghanistan. And secondly, major powers and international communities should provide development assistance to Afghanistan. For example, to improve the infrastructure and to train some talent, and also training governors to training officials of Afghanistan to improve the ability and implementations for governing the country and solve the social problems in Afghanistan. And also international communities, like some European countries, US, should help and persuade the people, the refugees back of Afghanistan, back to Afghanistan. We know over the past 20 years, even recently, there's so many people, some talent people, intellectuals and rich people, flee out of Afghanistan because they bring out so many, knowledges and fortunes out of Afghanistan. So international communities, great powers should help this kind of refugees back to Afghanistan. And then we all know that Afghanistan is rich in natural resources. As I heard from some reports, the natural resources in Afghanistan, it values about maybe trillions of US dollars. So if this all kind of natural resources can be developed, it must create more jobs and create revenues for Afghanistan government. I think it must be very helpful and a long-term peace for Afghanistan. And also our neighboring countries should play a leading role. We know geographically, Afghanistan located in the middle of East Asia, South Asia, West Asia, and Central Asia. Geographically, it's very important, but unfortunately, this geographic becomes the geopolitical dilemma for Afghanistan. Many superpowers want to utilize control Afghanistan as the base to control Eurasia for the dominant role, like the UK and the Soviet Union and the US. So if Afghanistan started the reconstruction, rebuilding, and maybe by the help of our neighboring countries, we can transform Afghanistan's geopolitical dilemma to economical advantage. So Afghanistan can become a bridge among East Asia, South Asia, West Asia, and Central Asia. So it's an advantage for Afghanistan to conduct trade with all neighboring countries and the Eurasia continent. In my personal opinion, if the road, even railway constructed, Gwadar Port and Chabahar Port can be a very important channel for Afghanistan, the natural resources exports. They can get to some hot water to Indian Ocean, to Middle East, to East Asia and European countries. I think that's very important. In my personal view, we know that China and Pakistan, we are building China-Pakistan economic corridor. Maybe, I also heard from the report, Taliban leaders hope that China-Pakistan economic corridor may be extended to Afghanistan. I firmly agree with that if Pakistan and Afghanistan, the region, realize peace and stability, all kinds of terrorist groups were eliminated from Afghanistan and Pakistan. I think it's a very good chance, very historical opportunities for China and Pakistan, Afghanistan trilateral cooperation. So we can transform China-Pakistan economic corridor to Afghanistan, China-Pakistan economic corridor. Many Chinese investment, especially, we know that China is very good at the building of infrastructure with high efficiencies. So we can help Afghanistan to improve the infrastructure. So with the improvement of infrastructure in Afghanistan, can help Afghanistan to attract foreign investment, to develop their economy, especially the development of natural resources and the manufacturers. So that's my personal view. Only stands for my personal view, not stands for any institute or Chinese government. Okay, so much for my my personal view.
Dr. Long Shinjun, I think a very insightful, constructive, and substantive intellectual contribution. I think it is very appreciable that you highlighted the significance of the neighboring countries of Afghanistan in stabilizing and developing and reconstructing Afghanistan. This is very important because the instability of Afghanistan has affected the neighboring countries and the regional countries more than anybody else. So it is all the more reason that the neighboring countries should play a leading role in promoting the reconciliation efforts and also rebuilding the war-ravaged Afghan economy and helping the Afghan people recover from such a long ordeal of instability and insecurity. And I think your suggestion in reiterating the idea of extending the China-Pakistan economic corridor by linking it with Afghanistan, I think is a very substantive idea. I hope with Chinese help and also the help of the international community and the neighbors, the environment becomes more secure and stable and allows this region to benefit further from the great opportunities that it offers. Thank you so much. And that brings me to the third speaker. The third speaker today is another leading Russian expert, Mr. Leonid Sevin. He is perhaps the most sought after and busy geopolitical analyst in the business right now. He is chief editor of the Geopolitica and founder and chief editor of the Journal of Eurasian Affairs. Earlier, he has served as the chief editor of Cation magazine and website. He has also served as the director of the Foundation for Monitoring and Forecasting of Development for the Cultural and Territorial Spaces. He has authored several books on geopolitics, conflicts, international relations, political philosophy, which have been published in Russia, Ukraine, Spain, Serbia, and Iran. So it is my great honor to invite Mr. Leonid Sevin to share his perspective regarding Russia's policy towards Afghanistan after the Western military withdrawal. Mr. Sevin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, dear participants, Your Excellencies, speakers, listeners. I'm very glad to be with you and to share my opinion. You know that Russia have specific experience with Afghanistan during the times of Soviet presence, military and political presence in Afghanistan. And now it's time for evaluation about this country and about regional geopolitics. But it's not only about region, but I think for global politics. If in August in Russia media were still discussion questions about whether the Taliban would like attack the countries of Central Asia, or maybe they will be kind of example of Afghanistan for extremist organization to organize similar emirates in the post-Soviet space. Now it has become obvious that there is no reason for such concern. It's likely that the holding of joint military exercise with Russia and Tajikistan somehow helped to balance the ideas of military threats and defense capabilities. And also on August 25-26, Air Forces of Military of Defense of the Russian Federation organized a flight from Afghanistan of citizens of Russia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, who applied to Russian embassy in Kabul for assistance in returning to their countries of citizenship. So we are not talking about evacuations like United States, but about assistance in return to their homeland. And despite the disorganization of the work of Kabul airport, the event for preparation and dispatch of this special flight was carried out successfully and with assistance of representatives of Taliban movement. That is interesting. Also, different discussion continue in the Russian media. And recently, I'm back from talk show of the TV of Russian Ministry of Defense, and we also talked about Afghanistan and situation with Taliban there. And Russian journalists, for now located in Afghanistan, and sent reports, and news continues to be in the top line. But what is important, representatives of the Russian power and main decision makers still keep silence. What to do next? If you look at the documents and speeches of representatives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or administration of the President of Russian Federation, you will not find any specific statements or proposals on Afghanistan there. Only the abstract phrases about the
Mr. Levin, I think you need to check your audio. Mr. Levin? Yes, you're okay now.
Taliban, the organ of the government or continuation of condemnation of this organization, like terrorist one, is not raised. Also, there are some signals that Russia will recognize the Taliban government. At least my discussion with colleagues from universities and some insider news have some basement for these ideas. In my opinion, now Moscow prefers to take a wait and see attitude so as not to fall under the barrage of criticism from the abroad. However, I am sure that if China recognizes the Taliban, Russia will also join this decision. On the other hand, Russia provided a platform for negotiation with Taliban before. Therefore, there is a mechanism for interaction and communication with this organization. As for global cooperation, there is very clear that Russia not interested to cooperate with the West on Afghan issue. I think it's very important. I believe that it was right decision not to join the J7 discussion on Afghanistan, and in future Russia should interact only with regional actors like China, Pakistan, Iran, and the neighboring countries of Central Asia. Maybe Turkey and Qatar can join for this platform. And recent experience shows that constructive work with the Western countries is not possible. You remember that on August 30, the United Nations Security Council adopted resolution 2593 on the situation in Afghanistan, where the United States, Great Britain, and France made the main contribution. Russia tried to make additions, but during the voting on the text, our country, together with China, take position to abstain, not to vote. Already at the level of preparing the document, Russia has tested the old methodology of Western countries when they jointly developing the draft test, deliberately create condition when there is no time to see the draft. And at very last moment, they submitted to the Security Council. At the same time, they organized the necessary leaks to the media. Nevertheless, some of Russia's comments were taken into account. Also, most of the proposals were ignored by United States, Britain, and France. They refused to include in the document information about necessary to fight against terrorism. I mentioned of Islamic State terrorist organization and the Islamic movement of Turkestan, which pose a threat to security in the region. The Islamic movement of Turkestan was excluded by the US State Department in November last year. And I assume that this was done intentionally in order to further use the assets of this extreme organization against China. Because of this, Russia and China could not support this document in the United Nations Security Council. Of course, the withdrawal of United States shows significant changes in the foreign policy of this country. They can no longer and do not want to be a global sheriff. Therefore, it's necessary to develop a collective security strategy in Eurasia and for Eurasia. We have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Probably it will be good to create some more platforms with effective mechanism of work and prompt response to emergency situations. What is very important, for my opinion, is a rethinking of the principles of politics as such. We are talking about the Taliban, meaning its religion's essence. But after all, there are comprehensive changes related to religious consciousness. I am not talking about secular religions, which can be presented by political ideologies like in the 20th century, like now in the West, but about the classical understanding of religions. That is about the connection with the transcendent. We see to the left and to the right of Afghanistan two states that are constitutionally Islamic republics. And now Afghanistan is gradually entering into this paradigm. This is an established fact. And probably this is logical for the continent where all world religions were born. It is Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and Buddhism. And in fact, we see that end of Westphalian era and should react accordingly to develop new agreements, introduce other principles of legislation, adopt national state system and regional organization, offer new solutions for international relations, primarily non-Western theories. And we see that in China, they have not one, a few non-Western theories of international relations. Pakistan and Russia should develop own theories and bring it on the global level there. Previous speaker from China already told some geoeconomic issues, so I will not to repeat his ideas, but I mostly agree with him, and I think we should to cooperate more on Afghan problem and largely on issues of southern Eurasia. And Russia also have interest to invest in Afghanistan in peaceful process and to participate in developing economics there. And of course, we can remember about Eurasian Economic Union and about Ring and Road economical project of the China, about idea to integrate both projects, Russian project and Chinese project, and Central Asia and Afghanistan itself, I think will be a good place to do this kind of job. Thank you for attention.
Thank you so much, Mr. Leonid Seven. A very insightful and very frank assessment of the situation, and sharing your deep insight into the Russian thinking and policy towards Afghanistan after the Western military withdrawal. I think since the subject in this webinar today is the role of regional countries, and it is very important that you mentioned that Russia prefers to work with the neighbors and the regional countries regarding Afghanistan in future as compared to the Western countries. So I think all the illustrious panelists, I'm sure will find your assessment and forecast very interesting and insightful. And that brings me to the fourth speaker of today's illustrious panel, another leading expert on Iran and my former teacher. It is my great honor to introduce Dr. Syed Qadil Abbas, who's a leading authority on Iran affairs, and his views and assessment are very sought after around the world and international media. We keep listening to his assessment. So without any further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Syed Qandil Abbas to give his talk on Iran's role in promoting regional peace and progress. And I look forward to his assessment and advice that how can, mutually with Iranian help, we can build a more secure, stable, and progressive region. So, Dr. Qandil Abbas, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Ali. Honorable speakers and dear audience, Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon. I think it is a very timely initiative because during especially last 2 decades, Afghanistan's neighboring countries have been source of influence, mutual influence for Afghanistan and for the region. And spillover effect of instability in Afghanistan has directly influenced neighboring countries of Afghanistan. So you have taken a timely initiative that recent developments in Afghanistan must be highlighted in the perspectives of neighboring countries. I am in next few minutes, I will try to highlight the Iranian perspective on recent developments in Afghanistan and Iranian views on that. I believe that during last 4 decades, Afghanistan remained main source of instability and insecurity on regional and even on international level. Foreign invasion and civil war-like situation in Afghanistan has directly influenced Afghanistan's neighboring countries, particularly Pakistan and Islamic Republic of Iran. So Iran is also an important neighbor of Afghanistan with its more than 900-kilometer common border with Afghanistan. Soon after Soviet invasion on Afghanistan, Iran faced Islamic Revolution, and Islamic Revolution also seriously affected regional and international affairs because that was a move against status quo in the region. So on the one hand, in 77, Afghanistan faced Soviet invasion. In 78 and 79, all the things were changed in the region because of Soviet invasion on Afghanistan, and particularly in context of Cold War at that time. But on the other hand, when Iran faced Islamic Revolution, that has also changed a lot of things, and particularly in the Middle East, and that has directly influenced Central Asia and South Asia as well. Right from its inception, Islamic Republic of Iran adopted its own defined independent foreign policy that was based on the principle of neither East nor West. And during the Cold War, this was the unique slogan for foreign policy. And that was neither East nor West. It means Iran was not ready to join with whether it is Eastern Bloc or Western Bloc. So that Islamic Republic particularly opposed invasion of both the superpowers, first Soviet invasion on Afghanistan and later on invasion of United States on Afghanistan. So both the invasions were opposed by Iran. So now Iran's, particularly Islamic Republic of Iran's main concerns about Afghanistan have been, on the one hand, Taliban's dominance with their rigid ideology in post-Soviet invasion era. And during that period, in 90s, during that period, 9 Iranian diplomats were killed in Mazar-e-Sharif by Taliban militants. That was created a serious problem between Iran and Afghanistan, and even Iranian forces were once looking ready to even attack on Afghanistan, but it was resolved by some interventions. After decline of Taliban, when United States entered into the Afghanistan, that became another concern for Iran, because Iran had and have very serious problems with the United States. So American military presence in Afghanistan was another concern for Iran. So during that period, I believe that Iran started to establish its connections with, on the one hand, Northern Alliance, and on the other hand, with Pashtun society. And particularly, they have also established their very good relations with Taliban as well. And during last 2-3 years, we observed that Taliban were having a lot of visits to Iran, and Iranians were having exchange of views with Taliban leadership. That was contrary to their traditional relationship. So present developments in Afghanistan are very important for Iran, as well as for all the neighboring countries of Afghanistan. This time, I believe Iran is in good relations with Taliban, and Taliban have also learned from their previous experiences, and they have also established good relations with Iran as well as with other neighboring countries. Today, even we can understand that Taliban's Amarat-e-Islamia is having more resemblance with a political system of Islamic Republic of Iran, because in Islamic Republic of Iran, their political system is based on supervision of supreme leader. And in Afghanistan as well, they are calling their main leadership, Hebatullah, as a supreme leader. And I think they are also trying to learn from Iranian experiences. To understand Iranian perspective in this regard, we need to understand domestic and socio-political, particularly demographic structure of Afghanistan. We know that in general, we can divide Afghan society into two main categories. These two categories are Pashtun society on the one hand and non-Pashtun society on the other hand. So non-Pashtun society is comprising Uzbek, Tajik, Hazaras, and some other groups. And Pashtun society, we know that is a very, very united society ethnically, but not religiously, ideologically, and politically. So very interesting aspect of this division is that Pashtun society is generally remained under influence of Pakistan on the one hand, and in last period, their leadership was under influence of India, particularly leaders like Hamdullah Mohib and Amrullah Saleh. They were under Indian influence. And in this way, we can understand that Pashtun society was generally under the influence of Pakistan as well as with India. But on the other hand, Northern Alliance or non-Pashtun society remained under influence of Iran, because they are generally Persian speaking, and similarly they remain under influence of Turkey as well, particularly Uzbeks. So this is very interesting situation. So using these influence and these dynamics, I think Iran in history, they were having their relations with Northern Alliance, but this time they have also established their relations with Pashtun society as well. So in present Taliban's success, I think it was not possible without understanding of Iran and understanding of Northern Alliance that they will not resist Taliban success. And ultimately, I think Taliban promised that after their success, Taliban will have power sharing with all the ethnic, political, and religious groups of Afghanistan. So this happened for their success. Iran is in fact now demanding inclusive government in Afghanistan based on power sharing for all the ethnic, religious, and political groups. Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian has discussed the latest development in Afghanistan with former Afghan President Hamid Karzai during a phone call on Tuesday. In this phone call, Abdullahian said it is the Islamic Republic's principled stance to support dialogue among the groups in Afghanistan to form an inclusive government which reflect the ethnic and demographic makeup of the country. And he further added, this is the only way for Afghanistan to reach lasting peace. This phone call, in fact, took place just some hours before the Taliban announced its caretaker cabinet, which was met with serious criticism from Tehran, because as Iran was expecting that this even caretaker government will be inclusive, that is dominant by Pashtun and Taliban leadership. Iran's Supreme National Security Council and its head Ali Shamkhani said in his Twitter handle that Afghanistan's first priority is stability and peace. Ignoring the need for inclusive government, foreign intervention, and the use of military means instead of dialogue to meet the demands of ethnic and social groups are the main concerns of the friends of the Afghan people. Similarly, speaking at a weekly press briefing, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Khatibzadeh also warned about foreign interference in Panjshir, the last stronghold of opposition led by Ahmad Massoud, who is the son of prominent anti-Taliban commander Ahmad Shah Massoud. Khatibzadeh also strongly condemned the Taliban attack on the Panjshir Valley and described the death of opposition leaders there as a martyrdom. This is a major indication of Iranian resentment at the Taliban's immature political deliberation to form a government. Khatibzadeh also pointed out Afghanistan's history shows that foreign intervention, both direct and indirect, has resulted in nothing but defeat for the aggressor forces. So these sayings and these statements are highlighting that about establishment of Amarat-e-Islamiyya of Taliban is not in accordance with Iranian expectation. Present setup is announced by Taliban that is comprising 34 members total, and out of 34 members, 31 people are Pashtun and from Taliban leadership. 2 of them are from Tajiks and 1 is from Uzbek. Both Tajik and Uzbek are also from Taliban leadership, and they are not considered as representative of Tajik or Uzbek community in Afghanistan. So I believe there is a need to understand that how Pakistan and Iran can collaborate to bring peace and security in Afghanistan. I think on the one hand, the issue of Panjshir must be resolved, and on the other hand, inclusive government is demand of Islamabad and Tehran. And for the time being, I think Taliban are of the view their present setup is caretaker setup, and when they will establish their permanent setup, there must be effort from Islamabad and Tehran that permanent setup must be inclusive, and that must be including representative from all the communities of Afghan people. So this is very important for the region, that this time Iranians are having very good relations with Taliban leadership. But if misunderstanding was created between Taliban and Iran, I think we can predict that Afghanistan will face another civil war, because the whole Northern Alliance and non-Pashtun societies are not satisfied by their present setup. And Iran is insisting on inclusion of Northern Alliance in Taliban's setup. But now it is a requirement and it is a need of the time that during dialogue process about Afghanistan's peace process and Afghanistan's future political setup, this issue must be taken as a serious issue that can bring a close relationship not only between Iran and Pakistan, that can include all the neighboring countries of Afghanistan. I thank you very much, and I'm ready for if there was any question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Syed Qandil Abbas. I think a very concise, comprehensive, and focused and candid assessment of Iran's foreign policy towards Afghanistan. And also, I'm extremely grateful that you identified the areas and approaches which can help Iran cooperate with Pakistan and other countries in stabilizing Afghanistan and promoting regional peace and progress. Thank you so much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are slightly running behind schedule because you'll probably agree that we had 4 very insightful, comprehensive, and informative perspectives on future of Afghanistan and regional stability. So we'll have a brief question and answer session before we will all have the pleasure of listening to the National Security Advisor of Pakistan regarding the future of Afghanistan and regional stability. So do stay with us as we quickly have the question and answer session. The first question that I have received is from Mr. Zafar Yousafzai. He has asked that, as reported, the current Taliban administration has ministers who are on the UN designated lists. How does the Afghan, Pakistan, and international community look at it? Perhaps I can request Dr. Fazul Hadi Wazeen to address this. Dr. Hadi, are you there? Okay, I think he's not around. Dr. Qandil, you want to have a go at it?
Yes, please, can you repeat?
Yes, the question is basically that some of the ministers of the current Taliban administration are on the UN designated lists. So how does Afghanistan, Pakistan, international community look at it? You're not audible, sir. Can you unmute yourself, please? Thank you.
I think it is already highlighted by Taliban that they had agreement with the United States in Doha. According to that agreement, they had excluded these leaders from their blacklist, and they believe that if they still include these leaders in that blacklist, that can create kind of mistrust between Taliban and United States. And under that agreement, I think a lot of other things are also agreed between these two parties. So if America is not excluding these names from their blacklist, Taliban will feel to violate some other issues which are already agreed in that agreement.
Right. Thank you so much. Another question from Mr. Zagam Habib is that should Pakistan and Afghanistan both must initiate and regularize all their relations, including trade and development, it will address long-term transparency issues. Additionally, it will help both countries to understand their interdependence and comparative advantages. Dr. Long, do you want to respond to that? Dr. Long, are you there?
Yeah. Yeah. And the question
is basically, it does not identify a preferred respondent, but since you mentioned a leading role of the neighbors in stabilizing Afghanistan, that's why I'm addressing this question to you, that Mr. Zagam Habib has asked that should Pakistan and Afghanistan both initiate a formalization and regularization of their relations, including trade and development? Additionally, will it help both countries to understand their interdependence and comparative advantages? You want to comment on that, Dr. Long?
Yeah, in my personal opinion, it's a fact that Pakistan is the most important country, neighbor for Afghanistan, because they share the very long boundary, and also some personal people both living in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And Gwadar port may be a channel for Afghanistan's export and international trade, and very, very comprehensive connections between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Also, Afghanistan, Taliban, and with keep a very close relationship with Pakistan. So among neighboring countries, Pakistan should be a leader, I think, for my personal opinion. Of course, other countries should support Pakistan. For example, to eliminate the terrorist group in Afghanistan. I think Afghanistan and Taliban cannot finish this obligation alone. They need help from Pakistan and or other neighboring countries. It's a shared interest for all neighboring countries. Only we realize the peaceful and stable Afghanistan, we can really start rebuilding in Afghanistan. And the shortest distance for Afghanistan to Indian Ocean is by way of Pakistan. So Pakistan is the most important country for Afghanistan. Yeah.
And while you're there, let me get your response to the first question as well, because and I'll also expect a comment from Mr. Leonid Seven as well, because both China and Russia are member of the UN Security Council. That because this point has been raised that some of the ministers of the Afghan Taliban are on the UN designated list. So do you think in future collaboration and recognition by China and Russia will be affected by that? Dr. Long, you can go ahead on that.
Yeah, recently the latest resolution passed by UN Security Council on Afghan issue, both China and Russia, we have the same position. So in the future, maybe Russia, even it's not a border, the territory border, but it's very closer. Also, Central Asia countries like Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan keeps very, very close with Russia. So we can looks Russia as also another neighbor of Afghanistan. So because US, European countries, UK, Australia is very far away, or China, Pakistan, Russia, Iran, yeah, very close. So all our neighbors. If Afghanistan, the situation become worse, all our neighbor countries, will be affected firstly. So all countries in this region, including Russia, should pay more attention and to the stability of Afghanistan and to take some effective measures, because China and Russia are the two members of the UN Security Council, permanent member of UN Council. So if China and Russia work together, we can stop and prevent other countries like UN or UK, Australia take a destructive role in the stability of Afghanistan.
I think that's a very, very valuable comment, Dr. Long. Let me also request Mr. Leonid Seven for his views on this aspect as well. Mr. Seven?
Yes, on global level, United Nations Security Council has some limits because the West can to impose veto for proposals of Russia and China. We experienced it very many times before. And our cooperation between Russia and China is very successful there. And still, I think we should to stay in the United Nations Security Council, but to propose other kind of formats for Afghan issue, maybe behind United Nations, because United Nations itself, for my opinion, is a senseless organization. They cannot resolve many problems over the globe anymore. And inside of United Nations, we see typical Western entities like World Health Organization and World Bank, IMF, and so on, and they to impose our policy that going not to in accordance with our interest, with the interest of Russia, China, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan. So, as I told before, we should to start developing kind of new platform and more closely to cooperate to each other, not only in political, military sense, but to think about diplomacy track too, because Afghanistan also needs cooperation on scientific level, on education, on trade and culture, and etc. So I think a lot of work need to do in the future.
Thank you so much. A quick question for Dr. Long. I think in a week's time, there's going to be a very important SCO summit coming up. What are your expectations from this SCO summit in the context of stabilizing and developing Afghanistan, Dr. Long? And maybe Seven, you can also have a comment, respond to that. Dr. Long?
Yeah, all neighboring countries, Afghanistan neighboring countries, are the member of or observer of SCO. Even Afghanistan was an observer of the SCO. So I think SCO maybe can play some kind of role. But the problem is that among the members, India sometimes there is so many international organizations. India sometimes mostly play a very negative role. That result the organization separate, united, because in Afghanistan issue, India took a very opposite position with Afghanistan, with Pakistan. So maybe there's some problem for SO to play any role. So maybe the newly neighboring countries, the land connected, the neighboring countries, China, Pakistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and also in Russia, maybe we can form a new mechanism for the peace and stability or reconstruction of Afghanistan. So I really concerned about what's the role of India, India's role in SCO. Sometimes very negative in many international organizations. India always takes, like, RCEP, so many, like soccer. The India's role often, separate the organization, not united the organization. So we can a new mechanism of like the neighboring countries, land-linked neighboring countries. So that's my personal view.
Right. Mr. Leonard Seven, would you like to comment on this?
No comment.
You don't want to comment on this? Okay. Okay, a very important question from for Dr. Kandil. Dr. Kandil, do you think there are spoilers like ISIS? Do you think it offers a potential area of convergence between Iran, Pakistan, and Taliban for a collective approach towards addressing this, Dr. Kandil? Can you please unmute yourself, sir? Dr. Kandil, you're muted. Can you please unmute yourself? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, please, sir.
I think this time we have both state and non-state spoilers about Afghan situation. On the one hand, we have spoilers like India, those who have adopted counter strategies for a peace process in Afghanistan. And on the other hand, ISIS is a serious threat for a peace process. But I think we should avoid from creating space for these spoilers to play their role in Afghanistan. You were asking about recognition of Taliban. I believe that in previous period, it was a mistake that only 3 countries unilaterally recognized Taliban government: Pakistan, UAE, and Saudi Arabia, and all the time they remained isolated. This time, I think the official perspective is that till the time there is not consensus about recognition of Taliban, we should not unilaterally recognize Taliban. But on the other hand, if Taliban want their recognition, they must be very clear about 2-3 things. First, they must have inclusive government. Second, they must have space for role of women in their political setup. And third, they must respect international law. So these things, if they are adopting these 3 things, I believe that spoilers will not be able to play their destructive role, and all the countries will be supporting Taliban to counter these spoilers. But if Taliban are not respecting these demands of neighboring countries and international community, that will create space for spoilers, and that can create more instability in Afghanistan.
Thank you. There's a question from Mr. Ashfaq Arai, and I'll link it with the last comment made by Dr. Long. Dr. Long, Ashfaq Arai, Mr. Ashfaq Arai has asked that basically, do you think it's time for the US to rethink its Afghan policy? Because, and it should not depend on the input from its strategic ally, India, which seems to be the biggest loser in this change environment. There's a sense here, and I'll appreciate your comment on this, because you mentioned that in SU as well, perhaps India does not seem to be offering a positive role. And similarly, the US-India relations also seem to be have come under strain after Afghanistan. So how do you see the role of India in this context, Dr. Long?
India in recent years, it's obvious that India turned to US play, very destructive role for the integral regional integration of Asia. History, the Anglo-Saxon, like UK or US in Asia, the strategy is to separate and rule. Now India play that role to help the US separate Asia and rule. So it's very obvious that India obviously gave up its non-alignment strategy policy. So I don't think India can play a positive role in Afghanistan. And also, so I hope that maybe will expect India to play a positive role in Afghanistan, because over the past 20 years, India invested a lot in Afghanistan and gave some aid to Afghanistan, and also then follow the US. So maybe India's role, that depends on what the role US will play in Afghanistan. That we don't think India will take an independent policy, Afghanistan policy. So we need to wait and see how US responds to the new government of Afghanistan. Maybe I believe India will follow the US.
Right, that's a very insightful response, Dr. Long. Mr. Leonard Seven, there is a question, and I will appreciate your response to this by Ms. Maheen Shafiq. Who could be the spoilers for peace in Afghanistan in future, in your assessment? Who actually poses a threat to the efforts towards peace and progress in future? What is your assessment?
Of course, the most depends of Afghani people, first of all, because Russians and Chinese can be more patriotic than Afghan people. So it depends of how they start resolution or reconciliation under Taliban government or under inclusive government. We don't know. Then we, of course, are ready to use our experience in diplomatic experience and for social programs for Afghan people from Russian side, and I am sure that China also can assist for this issue, and neighbor countries like Pakistan, Iran, and Central Asian countries. So, but as already told in my speech, we should to rethink about essence of politics itself, how it's going, and to start to develop a new paradigm for social development inside of Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, Mr. Levin. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm overwhelmed by a very large number of questions from around the world, which provides compelling evidence that this webinar is being viewed with a lot of interest from our friends around the world. And I'll have to apologize to them for, because we're already way ahead of our allotted time, and that has compelled me to now end the waiting period. And with that, we'll have the honor of the keynote address by Dr. Mueed Yusuf, the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of Pakistan. We have heard this, a very extensive assessment. Now let's listen to Dr. Mueed Yusuf, National Security Advisor's perspective on the future of Afghanistan.
Assalamu alaikum. First of all, thank you very much to the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan, dignitaries and all the guests. It's a pleasure for me to be speaking. Let me talk about the future by first referring to the past, because it's very important to understand why we are where we are. We had the Soviet invasion, and the war against the Soviets with the Mujahideen, Pakistan, US collaborating. In that war, after 10 years, a catastrophic error was committed by the Western world, an error that their own leaders acknowledged after 9/11, which was abandoning Afghanistan and sanctioning the most allied of allies, Pakistan. They lost touch with the ground. They left Afghanistan in shambles. It created a security vacuum. There was a civil war. There was an economic meltdown. And frankly, nobody cared about Afghanistan at that time, except Pakistan and a very, very few other countries. And Pakistan in very clear, selfish national interest. We've got a 1,600-mile plus border. We simply can't afford instability in Afghanistan. So Pakistan had to engage with whatever the situation there was. But because of that security vacuum, millions of more refugees, what came was 9/11. The world woke up again, went into Afghanistan with a military campaign, with what is clear now to the world, but was to us always, with an ill-fated goal of a total military victory. There were opportunities to strike a political chord and a political dialogue with the Taliban. They were foregone. And today we know that again it is being acknowledged by some in the West who matter that there was a mistake made. In any case, that abandonment was the reason why things went in the direction they did, and there was an intervention that was made after 9/11. Today we stand at a point where Pakistan for years had said the only option is a politically negotiated settlement. We were ignored. Pakistan got a backlash because of the war next door that wasn't of our making, lost 80,000 plus people, $150 billion plus in economic losses, and internal displacement of about 3.5 million people because of a terrorism onslaught in Pakistan that we had nothing to do with. It was because we had supported the West all out in the war in Afghanistan, and the reaction came from, by the way, those whose parents and some of whom themselves were called freedom fighters in the 1980s, but overnight after 9/11 were called terrorists, and so a reaction was inevitable. We are also the country that kept telling the world that there is an internal problem, there is corruption, there's governance failure, there's lack of credibility of the Afghan authorities. The army will not stand and fight. Back in 2010, our army chief at that time, General Kiani, now is being reported in books by Western officials, former Western officials, saying, this army can't stand, armies can't be created like this, it's a disproportionate representation of a minority ethnicity, and on and on. We were ignored. Rather, a narrative was created, unfortunately, by those governing Kabul who wanted to avoid being seen as the problem, who wanted to deflect blame for the real failures that they had created in Afghanistan, and an India that invested millions of dollars, not for the average Afghan's sake, but to undermine Pakistan, to create a fake narrative, to shift all the conversation about, oh, Pakistan is the problem. The reality was the problem was always inside. Pakistan was used as a scapegoat, and the result is the embarrassment that everybody who was present there for 20 years as the international community has had to face. I say this and I recount all of this for a reason. We are again at an inflection point in Afghanistan where there is a right choice, which is a difficult one, and there is an easy choice, which is to repeat the mistakes of the past. How so? Today, Taliban have announced a caretaker government, and the conversation is, how do you move forward with actors that have fought with you for 20 years if you are the Western world? There is a thought of abandonment. Why should we can walk away. There is a thought that no, there should be engagement. The problem is that the only engagement that's been talked about in the past 3 weeks is either evacuation or of humanitarian aid, which is critical. It must come immediately, but there needs to be deeper engagement for the sake of the average Afghan, to ensure that Afghanistan doesn't go towards a meltdown, an economic and governance collapse that would again send millions of refugees out of Afghanistan and create a fresh security vacuum in a place where already ISIS-K and others have shown their strength, especially ISIS and their presence, who threaten not only Pakistan but the West. For Pakistan, disengagement is impossible. I told you about our border. It's been porous for decades and decades. We've now fenced the border. Still, there are divided villages, there are ethnic connections, there are cultural connections. We cannot afford for instability in Afghanistan because it will spill over into Pakistan. We cannot afford anti-Pakistan militants sitting in Afghanistan. For 20 years, India sponsored them to strike and undermine Pakistan. We can't afford that anymore. But even for the world, think about the costs of abandonment. Why did things go wrong last time? Because the region was abandoned. If the same mistake is going to be made again, I'm afraid the security vacuum and the threats that come with it will come. It won't be contained to the region. The refugee crisis won't be contained to the region. So the prudent way forward is for the world to engage the Taliban. If there are any concerns, any preferences, they should be communicated directly. And don't underestimate the leverage that the world has. How so? Again, because the Taliban want legitimacy. It's very clear from their statements. They need assistance to run the country. That's the leverage. Incentivize them towards a governance model that's moderate, that's acceptable to all, that respects rights, but with that, it gives them the tool to govern their country effectively, to ensure that the average Afghan that has been ravished by war for 4 decades, who deserves much better, is not hurt anymore. I think it'll be a tragedy and it'll be unethical, frankly, if those who were engaged in Afghanistan for 20 years now turn their back, walk away from the same Afghan that has suffered for 40 years, who's been promised much more than has been delivered. Don't think of the government or the Taliban or this government or the whatever. Think of the average Afghan, and for that, engagement is crucial. For Pakistan, this is not a plea for Afghanistan. Again, I repeat, pure selfish national interest, because instability in Afghanistan radiates to Pakistan before anybody else. We have borne the brunt of those wars, and we don't want any instability coming from there. The only way to ensure that is constructive engagement from the world with Afghanistan to make sure that it moves forward. I also think it is not good if the international community does not coordinate. We don't want a split world in terms of how interactions happen with Afghanistan. The ideal scenario would be everybody coordinates on constructing a constructive engagement, and as I said, have direct conversations if there are any issues or concerns, just like the world would have with others who rule their countries. So that's the space I think to capture. I worry that oftentimes one keeps hearing about, oh, we're done, we don't need to worry about it anymore, but also it is time that the world stop scapegoating and use Pakistan as a scapegoat. The way the state of Afghanistan, the government of Afghanistan, the army, military of Afghanistan collapsed leaves no doubt that there was only one country that was speaking the harsh but real truth, that this won't last, this is not the right way to do it, negotiate politically and get there. And we were facilitating the Doha process throughout. We did as much as we could, but when the government collapsed, when the president decided to up and run, of course that process became redundant. The good news is Afghans have been spared the protracted conflict and bloodshed that would have come if there was a major battle on the ground before whatever outcome came in terms of the Taliban taking over this way or that way. Now we know that there is an opportunity to avoid the humanitarian crisis. We keep talking about managing it. We must avoid it, again for the sake of the average Afghan, and for our own sakes. We must not allow a security vacuum filled by international terrorist organizations to take root again. So we are very much with the international community. We've made our position clear. We want a government that respects rights and makes sure there is no terrorism from their soil. But if we are going to wait and see, if we are not going to give them space to deliver for their country, then frankly what we are saying is we really don't care if Afghanistan fails, and that'll be again a tragedy for the world, but an existential problem for Pakistan. So we are trying to coordinate with the world, regional consensus, even beyond that, and we hope we get there so that we have a stable Afghanistan, a peaceful Afghanistan. That should trump every other consideration right now. As I said, it is non-negotiable for Pakistan, but also for the world. It is really in everybody's interest to ensure that one shouldn't take it as a choice or a luxury. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was Dr. Moeed Yusuf, the National Security Advisor, warning the world that the cost of abandonment must be considered, and because it will not be borne only by the Afghan nation, but also by the neighbors and the region and the world. And that the world, he also urged that the international community, the region, and also the neighboring countries must help the Afghan people address with the ongoing humanitarian crisis, not just for the Afghan people's benefit only, but also for their own sake, because the consequences of Afghan instability will not be restricted to Afghan territory, and has and will harm the neighbors, the region, and the world. So these were very, I think, a timely and a very substantive message to the international community, and also to all the countries and nations who are committed to peace, progress, and prosperity of Afghanistan and this region. So with these few words, I have the great honor to request the acting president of the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan, who is also the former Vice Chief of Air Staff, to deliver the concluding address. But before that, I'll briefly introduce him for the benefit of those who are joining CAS for the first time. Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan is the acting president of the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies. He was commissioned in the GDB branch of Pakistan Air Force in March 1977. After commissioning, he served as a fighter pilot in various frontline fighter squadrons. During his service, he remained on various important command and staff appointments that included command of a fighter squadron, a fighter wing, and an operational PF airbase. His appointments at Air Headquarters included Additional Director General, Air Force Strategic Command, Chief Project Director of JF-17 Program, and Vice Chief of the Air Staff, an appointment he held till his retirement in July 2013. He has also served as the chairman of Pakistan Aeronautical Complex Board at Kamra, and has been President, Sea Federation of Pakistan on Civil Aviation Authority Board, and Chairman, Monitoring Committee of Islamabad and Multan Airport. The Air Marshal has also served as Pakistan's Air Attaché to New Delhi, India. So without any further ado, I'll request the acting president of CAS to deliver the concluding address. Sir, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Can you hear me, Ali?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, let me thank the learned panel for a very, very fruitful thought process and giving very valuable recommendations for future of Afghanistan. So in my short talk, I'll first touch upon the salience of my various speakers. Dr. Fazal covered comprehensively the background of Afghanistan. He was right in saying the present situation is a new chapter. We have changed environment. These are not same Taliban. countries around Afghanistan are also thinking from their previous lessons. So there's a great, while there are challenges attached to the situation, there is a great opportunity to renegotiate within Afghanistan and come up with the model of reconciliation that the whole region is talking. When we go to Dr. Long, our friend from Chengdu, he congratulates the people of Afghanistan for moving towards peace and stability, a country that has been marred with disturbances, chaos over 40 years. And let me emphasize this point, and I also endorse that this was not the doing of Afghan people. They are only losers and sufferers. So therefore, as he says, it is essential that we, all countries around Afghanistan, work together for a regional approach to bring the most important and the most desired, that is the peace and stability in Afghanistan. He's also welcomed the idea of such webinars, and he offered a joint webinar by CAS and his organization, and I accept that invitation. He also emphasized a very important recommendation that Afghanistan needs to be included in CPAC at this time to ensure connectivity with the region. When we go to the next speaker, our panelist from Russia, he has emphasized a very important point that China and Russia have similarity on the issue. So when it comes to recognition, if China recognizes the Afghan government, the Russians will, in his opinion. That's a very important point. He also recommends that the region, particularly China and Russia, and he in fact said so, that Russia is willing to invest in Afghanistan. And he also recommends a regional approach to solve the issues that are being faced at this time. Dr. Kandil Abbas, specialist of Afghanistan, did a good job in pointing out the areas. He says that Taliban and the Iranian government are very close to each other on the subject. The only difference that has erupted recently is Panjshir. He recommends resolving the Panjshir Valley issue on priority and bring an inclusive government. He says the present government of Taliban, headed by Taliban, the other ethnicity have been added, but those are also from Taliban. So there is a need that he emphasized that the other ethnicities of Afghanistan must be included in the setup that is so far, as per Taliban, is interim. Our national security advisor said something very, very important, that Afghanistan and Pakistan have no choice. We are neighbors sharing about 2,000 kilometers of border, have been affected by both the occupations, Russian and the Americans. Pakistan has been emphasizing from day one a peaceful settlement of Afghanistan, because anything that leads towards unrest in Afghanistan has immediate impact on Pakistan. We've suffered a lot over the last 40 years in terms of human resource, in terms of life, value, and infrastructure. Because after the first withdrawal, the US and the allies abandoned Afghanistan. And that then came the issue of 911. Again, now he's cautioning the world, please do not abandon Afghanistan. There is a cost this world has already paid for this action. So there is a need to engage Taliban on long-term basis, offer them support, offer them diplomatic acceptance, so that they can come up with a better governance model as required by the international community. So I share his views that the world must think about the cost of the abandonment of Afghanistan, like it did in the past. Now I just say a few points from my side about the conclusion of the seminar. We all know what has happened in Afghanistan. In fact, we are all aware of the present situation with Afghan Taliban announcing an interim setup of the government. However, what are the challenges and how can we handle those? I like to highlight a few of those. Although as the Afghan situation is evolving almost every day, so things could change. As it stands today, the first and foremost challenge to the Afghan situation, in my view, is likely human tragedy, which can come out of non-cooperation by the world community. As we see today, when the Taliban took over, they were slapped with freezing of their reserves, $9 billion so. The IMF stopped issuing SDRs, and their Western allies also withdrew their support that they were normally offering whatever. So this situation is not very good. What is happening in Afghanistan at this time? The banks are closed. Probably the government may not have enough money to pay for the pays. What would it mean? An unstable market. The inflation will rise, the prices will go up, and the cities will start to see the chaos that comes out of the people. And what will happen next? This chaos is bound to flow outwards to its neighbors. Maybe the first country affected by this perceived scenario is Pakistan, but other countries like Iran, Turkmenistan would be equally vulnerable to this. So therefore, the world, after having signed a contract, after exiting from Afghanistan, US and its allies, by freezing the assets, have done no good to Afghanistan and to the peace and stability in the region. So we would urge the world to ensure peace and stability in the region. There is a need to engage with Taliban and unfreeze their assets, which is their money. The next point that I wish to highlight is the subject of inclusive government. Now, Afghanistan needs to be seen properly in historic perspective. In a country like Afghanistan, which is divided ethnically, has a lot of factions on the basis of ideology, faced with some spoilers like India and other countries, it's difficult to achieve a consensus probably in this short time. While Taliban are supposedly working on it to engage all the factors, they have kept a door open in the government by calling it interim to include the rest. I therefore consider it important to highlight that the regional countries have now taken a very important role. They have a very important responsibility that they should influence their resources in Afghanistan. While they help them economically to solve the humanitarian problem, they should also jointly or individually, as the case may be, try and help Taliban to create a government of consensus of inclusive. We have no right, we do not think that at this time we should disbelieve Taliban that they're not attempting. They are attempting to have a conclusive government, inclusive government, but the situation is tight and difficult for them. So they need to be helped. So therefore, let me appeal to the world through this forum. You have tried all the kinetic means for decades in Afghanistan, which has caused human suffering to its people. It is time now for the world at large, but the region in particular, to try the peace in Afghanistan. Please give a chance to peace through your own efforts. The next point is about Taliban. They are not the same Taliban that we saw 20 years back. They are much reformed. They're different people also. And they're talking a lot of sense which is desired by the international community. But it is on Taliban. It is their responsibility to deliver their promises. They have promised to the world to deliver peace, better governance, corruption-free society, respect for the human rights, particularly the women, and above all, the elimination of terror outfits, a requirement of most of the neighboring countries. To name TTP, ETIM, Daesh, the Taliban need to work and come up to the expectation of the neighbors and the international community. Diplomatic recognition is yet another hurdle that Taliban are facing. Main hurdle comes from the West, which is failing to recognize ability, defeat, and withdrawal. I think, in my view, Taliban, after winning a war, have earned independence for the people of Taliban. So therefore, the people of Afghanistan need that recognition so that the engagement comes and funding starts for the reconstruction of Afghanistan. Much talked by all the forums, but very little done so far on this aspect. Therefore, the way to regional peace and prosperity, gentlemen, would run through Afghanistan. So therefore, all the regional powers need to work to engage with Taliban. To conclude, while the US and its withdrawing allies appear a bit laid down in recognizing the human suffering in Afghanistan, peace and stability in Afghanistan appears a common objective of the regional stakeholders. As it promises opportunities for mutual engagement, regional connectivity, like the CPAC, that could be a harbinger of economic well-being and prosperity of the whole region. Support to Afghanistan in food security, diplomatic recognition, reconstruction, and connectivity is essential to successful governance in a war-torn country. I would therefore urge, while the world has tried everything in the past, less peace, it is time now to give peace a chance in Afghanistan and indeed in the region. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Air Marshal Farhat Hussain Khan, for a very insightful and constructive suggestions and comprehensively consolidating the major takeaways of today's webinar. And that brings me to the end of this very substantive and comprehensive webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, this webinar was aimed at exploring and identifying ideas to help chart the future of Afghanistan in order to promote regional stability. I am grateful to all the learned speakers who joined us from around the world, from China, from Russia, from Afghanistan, and also all the participants and those who contributed through their comments and questions from around the world. I'm indebted on behalf of CAS that you showed interest and took time to listen to us and also contribute through your comments and questions. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 4 takeaways that are worthy of consideration that we have identified. Number 1, that Afghanistan, unfortunately, has been a victim of conflict and abandonment. Secondly, it is an obligation of the international community in general, but neighbors and regional countries in particular, to help the Afghan people achieve peace, progress, and prosperity, not just for their sake, but for our own sake, because the consequences of instability also affect the neighbors and the region. And lastly, as the chair of today's webinar stressed, the international community and neighbors also expect the new government in Afghanistan to deliver on their promises of good governance and peace and security, and also meet their security commitment regarding not allowing any terrorists or spoilers to use their territory against the neighbors, the region, and international community. With these few thoughts, I am grateful to the entire CAS team, the admin staff, the IT staff, the researchers for making this possible. And again, thank you all for joining us. Goodbye and Allah Hafiz.